Hello everyone, this video is going to be a little bit more unedited, but basically what I want to talk about here today is this idea of being extremely passionate about something, of working really hard to achieve that, but not getting the results you thought you were going to get. So in this past year, I've been trying to do a lot of different things. I had a lot of different objectives. So one of them was to get my PhD. I finished my master's in neuroscience. And so for the last year, I applied to different programs in the field to research mental disorders and potential treatments for different mental disorders. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to get into the programs that I wanted. And it was just, you know that the landscape is extremely competitive. You know, it is really hard to get into these programs. There are a lot of brilliant people in this world, and there have been also some funding concerns, especially with the NIH cuts. So that has made the field even more difficult to get into. But other than that, I also had various different projects. I launched a mobile app, which is available on iOS and Google Play Store, about mental and physical performance. And I've been getting back into mental coaching. This was something that I did some years ago, but then I stopped doing it because in moments of introspection, I was like, I'm too flawed of a person to actually be coaching someone on how to, improve their mental toolkit. And also, I was very focused on research, on publishing, on trying to get to publish, because it's also not that easy to get published papers out, especially good ones. I sort of stopped doing coaching, but then I got some support and some people close to me that were saying that I should get back into it. And now I'm also starting to get back into mental coaching because I've just discovered that it is truly a passion of mine. And I've realized that the fact that I am so flawed and that I work with my flaws maybe makes me someone that can be good at this. But basically what has been happening in this past year is that I have all of these goals and objectives, and I have been working my ass off really, and I just didn't achieve what I wanted, what I hoped for. And so there are a lot of things that arise when you are passionate and you're working really hard to get these objectives and you don't achieve them. And so one of them is you feel like a failure. Your self-confidence and self-value sort of plummets. And something that has been helping me, or at least I try to do, because sometimes it's hard to actually convince yourself after not achieving your objectives. You start feeling some friction regarding your self-image. I was never someone who was ever extremely confident in my abilities. I wouldn't say that that I struggle with self-confidence as well, but I started reaching this point where the image that I had of myself started to sort of disintegrate because I simply was not achieving the things that I thought I could achieve, because that version of myself was of course attached to certain performance metrics that I wasn't being able to achieve. But so a mindset that I've been trying to cultivate, and I think this can be very helpful for many people, is to just focus on winning the mental battle, right? So something that I can control is the amount of effort and work and discipline and dedication that I put towards one of these objectives that I have. But the outcome is not guaranteed, of course. For example, with the PhDs, the decision doesn't depend on me. Of course, I can influence it by publishing good papers, by doing the work, by writing amazing personal letters, whatever it might be. But still, at the end of the day, there needs to be someone on the other side who looks at your profile and says, okay, this person is actually good and competitive for this role. And that doesn't depend on me. I cannot force someone to make that decision. So what I've been trying to focus on is just on staying mentally resilient, on ensuring that I'm representing to the maximum of my capacity the values that I think are important in a human being. That even though I'm not achieving the objectives that I set out to achieve this year, I know that I worked hard. At least there is some solace in that. Another important aspect when you find yourself in a situation like this, in my opinion, is trying to remember why you set out to do these things. And so in my case, all of these decisions and places in this path that I have set myself in is a very uncertain path. So on the one hand, the life of a researcher is very uncertain because you depend on funding and on a lot of different variables. Having a startup is also extremely uncertain. As you might know, the amount of startups that fail to survive in those in that first year is actually rather small. So I've put myself in this path of uncertainty, and I could have chosen a more stable path. In the middle of this process, I think it's also important to sort of remember that idea that, the life we live is for many people a dream. And so many people would probably give everything to have some of the opportunities that I've had. And so I've been trying to really meditate on that and remember that when things aren't working well, when I'm getting a rejection, or when a certain objective that I've had in my professional life isn't met, I just try to go back to my love for the things that I'm doing. I think that is very crucial. And as long as that love is there, it truly helps in setting a path forward. In the middle of this, it's also important to keep in mind the idea of the sunk cost fallacy, right? So if you are in a situation where you are not meeting your goals, of course, you shouldn't quit them immediately. You need to make sure that you have tried your best to actually achieve what you want to achieve. But there is always that risk of you investing time and resources into something that might be doomed to fail. So keeping that in check has also been part of my process throughout this. So I've been setting some timelines and deadlines where if I'm not able to achieve what I hope to achieve, then it is maybe time to draft a new course of action and go there. Of course, this idea can be depressing for many people. It is for sure for me, but I think it is important when we are in these uncertain paths to also have these conditions and thresholds that can help us guide our direction. Another very important aspect of failure is how you frame it. So I don't know about you guys, but me personally, sometimes there is this tendency that it's like it's an automatic response where when you fail, you try to look for excuses or reasons that have nothing to do with you to explain your failure. And so that's something that is very important to be mindful of and to catch on early, because that doesn't provide you with any useful information. It is sort of like living in a fantasy realm, but it's even worse than a fantasy because it really bears no value at all. Because if you're putting the responsibility for failure on things that are external to you, even in situations where this might be true to some extent, because it's nothing is truly only just internal or external, but just really trying to focus on what type of things that you could have done to change or maybe improve your odds of succeeding, I think is time much better spent. So, for example, with my PhD, to some extent, I was very frustrated and trying to look for excuses for why I didn't get into some of these programs. I had this idea of myself that I was a capable person, that I was someone who was, just ready and a good match for those programs. And when I got the rejection, some of the instincts could be, for example, thinking that people are just getting in because they know someone in the program or something like that, or just focusing on the funding cuts that happened, that also reduced the amount of spots and vacancies in these labs. But the truth of the matter is that I competed for that position, and someone who was better than I am got the spot. And this is something that is very important to keep in mind, which is the stories that we tell ourselves can very easily build us up or break us down. And so if you go through a path of victimization, which many times is built on false assumptions, you will not be giving yourself sufficient insight to actually change your course of action and become better at what you're setting out to do. So in the middle of this process of failure, I always try to think about, okay, what can I do better? And I'm not even talking about performing big changes. I'm just trying to think what are the most efficient, time efficient changes that I can make in my performance, in the way that I have built these different processes and methods to work, what changes can I actually make pack a lot of added value? So, what I'm trying to say here is that when you are met by rejection or you experience a failure of some sort, I guess you need to build that switch within you where you immediately go to a mindset of, okay, how can I allow this experience to make me a better person? So having this mindset that accommodates change through adversity is critical, because if you don't develop that, then it's very easy to just stop doing things, right? So you get a rejection and then you just go into you retreat into your inner world, and you just keep on putting these protective layers, and eventually your world becomes so narrowed down, so small, that you just lose the pleasure of life. You just lose that curiosity, that sort of naive side of yourself that is important. I mean, oftentimes it is said that being slightly delusional can be helpful, and I think there is some truth in that. Because, I mean, before you set out on a project, you have no real idea if you're going to succeed or fail because you haven't done it yet. So, having a little bit of delusion can be very helpful, especially at the beginning, as long as that delusion is accompanied with the commitment to actually working very hard. In the middle of this, it's also very important to do a gratitude practice. So, when things aren't going your way, it's just very hard to get into this cloud of negativity where you just center all of your attention in things that you haven't obtained. And this is where it's very important to bring in some gratitude to your life. So think of the things that you are truly grateful for. I only got here because I had a supportive family that invested in my education. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be here today. So understanding that in the middle of this apparent failure or in the middle of this frustration, we need to remind ourselves that many, many people haven't had the opportunities we've had, and we need to honor that. So that is very important. And you might say, well, but I'm not that other person, and these things are very frustrating. And of course, they're very frustrating. And talking about positivity, this is where that idea of toxic positivity needs to be thrown away. Because sometimes in these situations, people will tell you, okay, just brush that aside and don't focus on that. And of course, that is to some extent true, but it is okay for things to suck and to be frustrated and to be angry. It's important to also let those emotions be in your plane of consciousness, and it's important to feel them. So I guess my advice there, and this is what I try to do, is to feel those emotions as deeply as possible, being as present as possible in those situations, so I can fully process the emotion and then move on and not linger in it. Because this is the fact of life. Life is a problem solving game where you have one problem today, you fix it, but then some other problem arises, and sometimes you can plan for these problems and expect them, but many times you can't. And sometimes you're going to wish that you could go back to the problem you've had, to that problem you thought was the end of the world. So to finish this video, because I've been talking for too long, I would just like to also mention a practice that I have been doing and can be very helpful for various situations. I think this is something that as a society we haven't been doing very well with, and we don't really educate this facet of life to many people. We normally tell people to not think about death, to not contemplate our mortality, and I think that is one of the appeals of religious thought, right? Which is this idea that there's going to be more. When we die, there's going to be an afterlife. It doesn't stop here. But I think contemplating our mortality can be extremely useful because it helps us straighten out our priorities. It reminds us that this is the life we have, and this life is deeply uncertain. Maybe I'm not going to get to upload this YouTube video. Maybe you're never going to see this because I'm going to have a stroke before I upload it. Who knows? But this is the fact of life. It's uncertain, and as far as we know, this is the only chance we get. So these are some of the ideas or meditations that have been going through my mind in this process, where I'm facing some rejection and where I'm not satisfied because I haven't been accomplishing the goals that I set out to achieve. But yeah, hopefully you found this video useful. It was a little bit unstructured, but hopefully, yeah, you found this useful. And please let me know if you are facing a situation like this, and if there is something that you do that I haven't mentioned that could also be very useful. Thank you.